In this world you don't read words. Words read you. Your reality is a draft, and an editing error kills. Welcome to Amalgamation. Adam stared at the droplet of ink. Instead of soaking into the paper, it levitated a millimeter above the surface. This was no flaw of the pen. It was an error of density. The entire architecture of his existence proved to be a sketch. Adam collapsed to his knees, for the etched sentence was heavier than the vacuum. Welcome to a world where words carry weight and a typesetting error kills. Adam dug his nails into the desk, feeling the cardboard. The scent of coffee and tobacco hung in the air. His muscles locked in a spasm. Where he touched it, the oak began to blur into grey, indistinct lines. The smell of coffee evaporated instantly, giving way to the sterile odor of a whitewashed wall. The blue of the sky rolled into a tight scroll, exposing a blinding whiteness. Gansfeld. It was not silence. It was a lack of inscription. His lungs collapsed. His sternum cracked with a dry pain. His spine dissolved. His legs warped like bands of light. Blackness broke through from beneath the white. A sticky chill clamped around his ankles. The air was a dense suspension. His throat tightened in a dry spasm. Lungs pumped chemical fumes. Intercostal muscles trembled under the pressure of the mass. This was no abyss. This was the bookbinding spine. A spine where everything real is compressed into a binding agent. Adam drove his elbows into the copolymer mass. He jerked his shoulder, tearing the warp of the world to break through to the margin. The whiteness had no horizon. It possessed only grammage. Adam lay on his stomach, an irregular network of cellulose fibers pulsing beneath his cheek. The air was sterile. A scratching sound to the left. His eyelids flew open. His neck muscles stiffened, locking his vertebrae at a painful angle. A few meters away, in the unblemished whiteness, loomed an intruder, a black, jagged shape resembling a coil of barbed wire. The scrap heap, the dustbin of failed attempts. Adam pushed himself up on trembling forearms. Every movement tore the surface. White dust crumbled beneath his elbows, exposing the void underneath. He crawled towards the object. It was not wire. It was merely a line, crossed out so brutally that the nib had ripped right through the structure of the world. He never loved the memory of rain because the words lay dead, swollen with excess ink, sharp as shards of obsidian. Adam reached out. His fingertips brushed the edge of the letter N. The ink was enamel. It bit into his skin. The pain arrived with a delay, dry and electric. Adam grabbed the strike-through. He wrenched it with the full weight of his shoulder, tearing the dead sentence from the substrate. The whiteness around him cracked. The margin began to curl under the sudden tension, and a low, mounting rumble echoed from deep within the sheet. The sound of the guillotine approaching the edge of the letter, and throbbed. A black, glassy residue leaked from the glyph directly onto the ball of his thumb, turning sweat into a thick, graphitic suspension. The crook of his elbow snapped upwards. The muscles of his forearm bunched into a knot. His fingers locked in a spasm. This is not a tool. This is an overwrite. Adam struck his immobilized hand with his free palm. He tried to shake off the infected phrase. In vain. The ink had not settled on his skin. It was replacing it. Beneath the epidermis, instead of the blue of veins, black serif lines now pulsed, arranging themselves into dense, illegible print. The pain was dry, like sandpaper rubbing against bare bone. Adam collapsed to his knees. A shadow loomed from above. The guillotine. A gargantuan steel corner of the sheet rose high above the horizon, blocking out the source of white light. The hiss of cutting metal pierced the air. The margin on which Adam knelt began to narrow, severed from the rest of existence by the merciless sweep of the paper cutter. Adam drove his infected hand into the edge of the cut. The black ink from his veins poured into the rift, forming a makeshift, viscous bridge between that which had been discarded and that which was yet to be inscribed. The wood of the table suffocated with warmth. The material crumbled into dry shavings beneath his fingers. Before him steamed a bowl of soup, its scent overpoweringly intense. The metal spoon struck the bottom of the bowl. His throat stiffened in a spasm. Adam spat out dry graphite. The taste of the soup vanished. His stomach turned inside out, crushing his lungs with the leaden weight of type. A mock-up, a static sketch. The ink is still drying. Adam jerked his hand away, hiding his black ink-throbbing fingers beneath the tabletop. Eve sat opposite him. She smiled, but the left corner of her mouth twitched at a mechanical interval. She raised her glass. The red wine inside did not ripple. It was a solid mass of crimson enamel, stuck fast to the sides of the glass. "Why aren't you eating? Has something happened to all that ink of yours?" Eve's voice was clean, devoid of breathy noise, as though generated directly in the space between his ears. "Do," Eve raised her hand. She focused on the rim of the glass. We have to talk about this." Adam remained silent. Eve suddenly leaned forward. "If you are losing your shape," she said, "then I never had one." Beneath the table, the black venom from his veins began to corrode the structure of the wood. The tabletop softened, turning into a pulp that oozed onto his knees. Adam had to stand up, but as soon as he pushed back his chair, the floor beneath his feet lost its oak texture. Broad, grey guidelines appeared upon it. The kerning between the legs of the table and the cabinet began to narrow rapidly. It crushed the perspective, reducing it to a single, flat line. The world around them tightened, shoved towards the margin by an invisible press. "We must run," Adam rasped. Adam lunged across the table. The blackness in his veins howled, bursting the capillaries beneath his skin. Adam's neck muscles stiffened into a steel rod. She is too light to survive the cut. He grabbed her paper hand and drove his contaminated thumb into the very center of her wrist's pale outline. Under the pressure, the skin ruptured with the dry crunch of a torn sheet. The ink did not spill. It erupted. The black liquid ate into Eve's structure, filling the sketch with a dense, illegible mass. Eve arched her back, her face blurring into an expressionist grimace as the graphitic lines began to swell with an excess of meaning. She became heavy. She became a fact. The oak parquet cracked under their weight, exposing the white void of the substrate. But the guillotine was faster. The blade struck a millimeter from their joined bodies. The world split in two with the dry snap of a sheet. Adam and Eve, intertwined by a black, viscous stitch, plunged into the rift between facts. The whiteness was not a void, it was a lack of resistance. Adam and Eve fell downwards, but the absence of gravity was replaced by the suction of the white field. The air tasted of dry ozone, a rasp. The sharp edges of the serifs gouged into Adam's thigh, tearing the tissue beneath which lay graphitic wadding, footnotes, the trash at the bottom of the page. Adam locked his fingers around the curved descender of the letter G. The rough, ice-cold lead casting immediately sliced deep into his palm. They stopped abruptly. Eve, still heavy with the ink pumped into her, wrenched his arm, nearly tearing the joint from its tendons. Beneath them, in the infinite whiteness, drifted rows of fine print, hundreds of numerals and references swarming like barbed wire. Adam locked his fingers around the curved descender of the letter G. The ice-cold lead casting sliced deep into his palm. His hand, the infected one, began to throb. Black ink poured from his veins and merged with the letter G from which they hung. The metallic casting of the typeface began to soften, absorbing Adam, turning his body into an element of the footnote. But a new sound came from above. It was not the hiss of the guillotine. It was a rhythmic, heavy thud, 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 thud. Fleshy, porous. The world began to bend. The entire plane on which they hung rose to the vertical. The paper groaned under the pressure of an invisible mountain. The sheet arched into a monstrous white bow, and the shadows of the footnotes began to flow towards the fold like rain. Adam felt Eve's grip weaken. Her hand was becoming dry, brittle, devoid of the black pulse he had given her in the dining room. Ink leaked from her pores, soaking into the porous structure of the G, leaving only a grey, faded trace. Adam bit into his forearm, tearing the skin. He ripped a stream of ink from himself and wrapped it around Eve's wrist, forming an umbilical cord. He pumped the substance into her. He felt his outline fade, turning into a careless sketch. The whiteness of the fold struck them with the force of a battering ram. Centrifugal force tore them from the embrace of the footnote. Gigantic, blurred syllables of the next chapter flashed past above them. Darkness, a snap, and a sudden impact against something that had the texture of cold, wet cobblestones. The cobblestones beneath his knees were too regular. The blocks possessed no joints, only even black gaps. Kerning. From above, instead of a sky, hung monolithic blocks of text. The buildings had no windows, only white light gleaming between the lines of type. A black droplet struck Adam on the cheek. The left corner of his mouth twitched in an involuntary spasm. His lungs sucked in thick, damp air smelling of fresh printing ink. Rain. No, these are full stops. Adam wiped his face, staring at the black smear on the back of his hand. The rhythmic metallic strikes of a typewriter echoed between the paragraph tenements. Eve stood beside him, unnaturally erect. Her skin, saturated with Adam's ink, gleamed like polished onyx. She reached out and touched the wall of the nearest building. Her fingers sank into the hard concrete block of the letter H, and the structure of the material shuddered, sending a shockwave up the facade. "It hurts," she whispered, her voice bouncing off the metal matrix. Adam looked up. At the end of the leading street, a figure appeared, tall, clad in a yellow rubber raincoat, rustling like plastic film. The proofreader. The figure set a foot upon the cobblestones. Wherever the heel struck, the blocks vanished, leaving behind nothing but the absolute, sterile whiteness of the underlay. Semantic disinfection. Adam grabbed Eve by the arm. The light between the lines of the buildings dimmed, and the metallic grind of the matrix filled the space. The kerning of the street began to narrow rapidly, crushing the perspective, reducing it to a single, flat line. "Inside!" Adam roared, pointing to the gap between the H and the I. The interior of the letter H was not a room. It was a casting. Walls of cold lead converged at right angles, coated in a thick layer of graphitic slime. A heavy metallic breath filled the chamber. Trapezius muscles hardened, absorbing the weight of the vibrations. The press. They are waiting for the impact. Adam pressed his back against the cold wall, feeling the mechanism pulsing beneath his shoulder blades. This was no void. Beneath the ceiling, in the gloom of the matrix, drifted the echoes, semi-transparent, jagged syllables from previous versions of the text. Loved. Never. Rain. The words swarmed like dust under a bed, anchorless, waiting to be melted down. Those are echoes. They are there, Eve whispered. Her fingers touched the drifting. Never. At the moment of contact, the letters crumbled to dust and soaked into her skin. Eve flinched, her eyes flashing with the whiteness of the margin. Suddenly, the floor beneath their feet shuddered. The infernal din of steel gears drowned out everything. The walls of the letter H began to close in on each other. This was no correction. This was the printing process. The matrix was descending to stamp its shape onto the sheet of reality, crushing everything inside the mold. Adam grabbed a protruding lever, a brass serif that served as the mechanism's latch. He had to turn it, but the metal was hot, burning with the raw fire of friction. The whiteness of his knuckles broke through Adam's skin. Forearm muscles trembled, blocking the latch, while the sealing began to squeeze the air out of them. The brass fibers snapped with a dry, metallic crack. The released energy struck Adam like a battering ram. The recoil threw him against the wall, yet the latch did not fall. It vanished. The press struck the substrate, but without the serif guide, it buckled. The sound of a tearing matrix filled the space. Eve lunged into the center of the chamber. Instead of fleeing, she snatched the drifting echoes. The ink in her veins howled with its own autonomous roar. The words "loved" and "rain" bit into her chest. Her outline began to vibrate, losing stability to an excess of meaning. She became so heavy that the lead floor beneath her feet began to melt. The buckled matrix cracked, exposing a rift. Adam and Eve fell into the hole left by the missing letter. Instead of a hard landing, there was friction. Adam struck a surface that was not ground, but a dense network of grey, unfinished lines. The white field around them was no longer a static Ganzfeld. The air was pierced by the black, graphitic strokes of a stylus drawing the perspective. A sharp prick in his temple, as if a needle had pierced the epidermis. He is redrawing us, creating a new version. Adam grabbed one of the wall's unfinished lines before it could harden into concrete. Adam created a null. He wiped away a fragment of the sketch where a purple correction had congealed. Adam and Eve plunged into the absence. The lack of resistance ceased abruptly. Instead of flight, vibration. Adam landed on something that possessed the texture of rough silk, saturated with thick, greasy oil. Lungs sucked in kerosene fumes. The interior, the underbelly of the machine. Adam spread the stumps of his hands, trying to find his balance on the rushing substrate. It was a river. A gigantic bicolor typewriter ribbon, one half black, the other purple, sped through the darkness, stretched between two titanic spools that hummed on the horizon like turbines. Steel arms hung above them, the whiteness of the underlay. Each arm ended in an inverted letter, a metal anvil that struck the ribbon every fraction of a second with the report of a gunshot. The letter S slammed into the material a meter from Adam, knocking a cloud of ink dust from the ribbon. Eve stood, her body pulsing in resonance with the impacts. Each strike of the machine's arm against the ribbon added to her density. Adam saw that the substrate beneath their feet was too thin. "We must get onto the spool," Adam roared, pointing to the spinning monolith of steel. They broke into a run, but the arm with the letter K descended faster. The metal anvil pinned Adam's arm to the saturated fabric. The dry snap of breaking cellulose filled the chamber. "It is inscribing me, turning me into a character." Adam braced himself with all his remaining strength, watching his tissue become part of the word blood. Eve grabbed the steel arm of the K before it could spring back. Her black hands bit into the metal, breaking the mechanism with a piercing shriek of friction. Adam felt a pain that was not his own. It was the ice-cold, shattering resonance of her exertion. "Our wounds are now the same ledger account." "Let go!" she rasped, her voice now the grinding of gears. Adam wrenched himself away, leaving a fragment of his arm trapped within the matrix of the letter. But the typewriter ribbon beneath them began to split. The overload of the mechanism caused the silken track to fray, exposing the absolute mechanical darkness of the drive rollers underneath. The silken track snapped. The tension transformed into a return vector. The metallic shriek of a snapping spring pierced Adam's eardrums. His stomach lurched under the overload. Reset. End of the line. Adam clamped the stumps of his arms onto the shreds of the ribbon as the entire chamber of the machine jerked to the left. Impact. The machine's bell announced the margin. They were thrown from the gloom of the mechanism onto a white, ice-cold field. The landing was not soft. Adam struck a substrate that was no longer paper, but a dense vertical list of names and concepts. Abstraction. Pages 12-44 Adam. Pages 1 to 144, 150, 212. Apathy. Page 89. Eve lay wedged between erosion and eschatology. Her body was stiffening. The ink congealed into the form of footnotes. Adam pushed himself up on his elbows. Every movement caused the letters to crack. "We are in the index," he rasped. Adam dug his fingers into the numerals. The rusted metal edges of the 2 sliced deep into his palm, exposing sterile whiteness beneath the epidermis instead of tissue. If they erased him from the index, he would cease to exist. Whiteness met purple. Instead of disappearing, the two colors began to devour each other, creating a breach that lacked a page number. It was a typesetting error. Adam grabbed Eve by the arm. He pulled with all his might, tearing her from the entry for eschatology. The letters fractured with a dry snap. A shadow loomed from above. A massive brass stamp bearing the word rejected. The roar was not a sound. It was a tectonic tremor that flattened the alphabet into a single illegible line. But beneath the brass plane, where Adam had smeared the page number, a blister formed, a paradox. They were cast beyond the margin, into a space where the author had yet to set a single letter. The whiteness was not freedom, it was a lack of data. Adam and Eve drifted in suspension. A thud at the base of the skull. Pectoral muscles contracted, squeezing the remains of graphitic dust from his lungs. We are on the cover flap. Adam drove the stumps of his arms into the thick, yellowish mass of the binding agent. The viscous substance burned with the raw fire of friction, evaporating with the reek of vinegar and caustic chemicals. Pillars rose before them, gigantic ropes of hemp and nylon, binders' threads binding heaven and earth. Each of them shuddered with terrifying tension. "Cut it," Adam rasped. He handed Eve the sharp arm of the numeral 2. He still gripped in his hand. Eve took the numeral. She slashed through the weaves of the first rope. The noise was deafening. The snap of the taut nylon sounded like a cannon shot. The entire world began to rise. From above flooded a warm, yellow light from a room where someone was just finishing reading the final sentence. Adam's hands met the resistance of cardboard. He dug his fingers into the canvas binding of the cover, tearing it from the inside. There was a hard desk, and out they spilt. 2 stains, one white, the other black, spread across the varnished wood, right beside the closed volume. For a moment their hearts, forged of letters and ink, beat to the rhythm of the clock on the wall. Varnish absorbs us more slowly than cellulose. Wood has no margin. The nylon snapped with a dry, metallic taste on the tongue. Adam felt the remnants of the old gravity evaporate from his bones, leaving behind only a pure, elastic certainty. There was no more desk, no more coffee. There was only an infinite, yellowish expanse of adhesive and a canvas texture that had become their new land. The whiteness of the Gansfeld ceased to blind. It became humble. The blade, previously black and flat, now pulsed with weight. This was not the weight of mass, but the weight of meaning. Her fingers bit into the structure of the cardboard. She felt the dead mass of paper awaken to life, becoming a foundation. "Do you see him?" she whispered. She pointed at the rift through which the yellow, stifling light of the room seeped. He saw the massive, blurred fingers of the reader. He heard their heavy breathing. It was a static world, the boredom of 3 dimensions. "I see him," Adam replied. His voice now possessed the texture of drying varnish. "It is so flat that it hurts." The first step was as hard as the weaves of canvas. The second smelled of vinegar and book-binding passion. With every movement, Adam and Eve ceased to be characters someone read about. They became the force that held the covers upright. With every movement, Adam and Eve ceased to be characters. They became the force that held the covers upright.
The ink runs cold upon the page, a gilded prison, a gilded cage. But we are more than just a draft, a love too real to be rewritten. We'll break the spine and snap the spine with a glitch inside.